So our congregation uses two different prayer books, and actually sometimes even more than two. And honestly, it didn't happen because we sat down one day and decided to try this experimental synagogue, or that we were intellectually superior and wanted to try more than one siddur to challenge ourselves. It happened because we were trying to survive as a small Jewish community. And the more I participate in trainings, seminars, and conversations with other small congregations, the more I know that we are not alone. There are communities all over the country that are quietly mixing traditions and rotating liturgies, blending melodies, and adapting Judaism to whoever actually shows up. And a lot of these small congregations are becoming more pluralistic long before anyone stops to officially name what is happening. And honestly, I think that happened to us too. When I unexpectedly became the spiritual leader of our congregation, I realized very quickly that we had an identity problem, or more accurately, not an identity problem, but an identity drift problem. Not because anyone intentionally changed the congregation, but because over the years of adapting to new people, changing leadership, military turnover, and shrinking numbers, we had slowly drifted into something more pluralistic than anyone had really acknowledged out loud. The immediate problem I had to solve was much more practical. How do you lead services for a congregation where people come from completely different Jewish backgrounds, expectations, and prayer experiences? And then there was another complication. We had recently had a water leak that destroyed many of our siddurim. So suddenly we had this strange collection of books. We had a small set of brand new shiny Lev Shalem siddurim to replace some of our regular siddur hadash siddurim that had been destroyed. We had a decent stock of Mishkan T'filah from a rabbi that had been with us 6 years prior. We had an Orthodox military siddur that somehow managed to both be too Orthodox for most people and yet not Orthodox enough for others. So we had an older high holiday set of books as well, that were rapidly aging out with their spines literally in some cases disintegrating. So at the same time, I had just finished that fundraiser campaign to replace our old Moxors with Moxor Hanafesh, the Reform Moxor. Because we are a military congregation, because we constantly have people rotating in and out, lay leaders, rabbis, personnel with different Jewish experiences, we had a struggle trying to figure out what to do for siddurim. Some wanted more traditional services, very structured, loved all the Hebrew prayers. They wanted the whole thing. Some wanted more accessible services. Even some people who wanted accessible services wanted the accessible services, but could not read transliteration. So then even that became more of a challenge. Some knew how to daven independently, and honestly, most did not. Some wanted the structure, the tight structure, and some wanted more flexibility to add more songs or to change the types of services. So my first real leadership challenge became, what prayer book are we even going to use? So what I determined to do was moved the Friday night service to Lev Shalem, a book that, although it's a sister to other books we have used, that we have never honestly used. And honestly, it went badly. Not because Lev Shalem is a bad book. I love Shalem and was instrumental in replacing our old Moxers, which we could no longer get because they were out of print, with Lev Shalem. But I realized something important very quickly. Many people in our congregation did not actually know how to navigate a siddur or services independently. What they knew was a familiar congregation, familiar choreography for siddur hadash. They knew how our services worked when we did siddur hadash. They didn't know how Jewish services worked in general. So when I ask people to pray silently and rejoin at certain points, as happens in Siddur Lev Shalem, many still tried to follow me line by line because that was the habit they had built over the years. And suddenly I realized something very uncomfortable. If Friday night services were already wobbling this badly using the new siddurim, restarting our monthly Shabbat services when we did in winter, it was going to completely fall apart. So I had to pivot. I started inviting my adult Hebrew school students and others who were really excited about learning how to read Lev Shalem in Hebrew or whatever manner it presented, to my Friday Shabbat services. I also started doing online classes, an introduction to the Siddur class. If I had at least 4 to 6 people who were willing to sit with me online for a 2-session group, I went through how Siddur Lev Shalem works. I made slides for Friday nights explaining what needed to be prayed and when, and everyone could follow along. And I tried to build confidence and structure instead of assuming everyone had it. So that if I had all the slides up on the screen, and because the way our streaming system works, not only can the audience see the participants, but the participants who are in person can also see the screen that the online folks see as well. It's a way of making us one community. They were able to be assisted by those slides as well. So, but even then, it became clear that changing a prayer book is never just changing a prayer book. Everyone has habits. They had habits, they had melodies, they had expectations, they had memories, and those were challenging. The memories even were challenging, and I'll explain in a moment. They had assumptions about halacha. They had assumptions about who participates when and how, and they had assumptions about what a normal Jewish worship service was supposed to feel like. And then luckily, High Holy Holidays last year changed everything for us. I decided, like I said, to purchase the Machzor HaNefesh, partly because we honestly never knew what combination of lay leaders or rabbinical interns or chaplain interns or volunteer rabbis or just lay leaders we would have from year to year. And operationally, that book was simply easier to work with. But unexpectedly, people connected with it. I think partly because our congregation already had a long history of quietly blending our traditions anyway. 8 years prior, we had a reformed rabbi who had purchased the Mishkan T'filah that we have. And so there was a period of time while she was here that we used those reform Machzor or reform siddurim on weekdays, but we still sang the conservative melodies using that reform book. So we had maintained some older community habits and memories. So after the High Holy Holidays, it became much easier to make the case that maybe Saturday Shabbat services should move towards Mishkan T'filah too. And eventually that led us into the rotation system we use now. But multiple prayer books creates new challenges. And eventually I realized that I'm not just rotating the liturgy, and you will realize that too. You're rotating assumptions. So what halacha are we following when we use this book? Or what halacha do we follow as a congregation? And does a change in book change halacha? What customs still matter? In fact, I can show you an example. In many Reform congregations, women are not required to wear kippot when they're up at the Torah, And in our conservative congregation, Kippot for all is absolutely a tradition that is not bent or broken. What melodies stay? Do we use conservative melodies on the reform? Can we use new reform melodies and bring them over to conservative? What traditions disappear? And most importantly, this was the crazy one. What happens when one prayer includes one prayer book or siddurim includes a prayer or a practice, then another simply leaves out? We had been used to starting Friday night services with a certain prayer in Siddur Hadash every single week, and the new prayer book did not even have that prayer in it anymore. So that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. And I had tried very carefully to get people to help me with feedback, but because nobody really wanted to form a liturgy committee or a rabbinic steering group or talk about any of these issues to make group decisions, I eventually had to make a leadership decision because the decision had to be made. So I decided that the prayer book itself would determine the halakhic framework for that service. When we use Lev Shalem, we lean conservative. When we use Mishkan T'filah, we lean reform. Now, not everyone agrees with that approach, but the one thing that I've learned about small congregations is this: sometimes consistency matters more than perfection. And some of those who were upset about the rotation or don't care for it, like they'd like one book for both, have come along. And frankly, honestly, we have lost a couple more people, which we desperately do not want to lose anyone anymore. But I know that many small Jewish communities are also quietly having to make similar compromises as well. And it's not because the ideology changed first. It's because the reality changed first. Membership changed. Leaders have gone back and forth. Resources changed. Community shrank. That's the biggest one. Your community shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. There's not enough of those people who are okay with things either way to buffer those who are really very traditional from those who would like to be very modern and new. People had to adapt, and as your community shrank, there isn't as much variation to adapt to. So slowly the congregation drifted into a new identity before anyone ever stopped to name what was happening. And unfortunately, it landed in my time period to say, listen, we need to name this identity. Now, we did, and we are doing okay. But is everyone completely happy? No, they're not. Sometimes I ask for feedback and hear absolutely nothing. And sometimes I organize listening sessions around food because honestly, that's the only way sometimes people want to talk when it's already bridged into something else. They just want to get in and do their fun or do their service and then head home. They don't want to come in for an extra conversation period. So some people have told me that they still want more tradition, and some people have told me that they really like it when I make a whole new service and make something totally different. But at the same time, I also see something encouraging, that although our numbers had shrunk again a little bit more, when I first started this transition, some of our celebrators are becoming participators. So people are moving from just holidays and whatever to participating with us more regularly on Fridays and Saturdays. I noticed that people are stepping in more and people are asking if they could help in certain areas. And I think this is frankly people finally getting used to this rhythm and people getting used to the fact that there is a leader in charge who is willing to make decisions. They're learning more. They're trying to lead more with the English prayers and what they can know. Those who are Torah readers are asking to step up and help read some Torah, which is wonderful news. So while we are still struggling with and finding retaining new members, I do think that some of these adaptations are helping us to survive in the short term. And I honestly know that many small Jewish congregations across America are wrestling with this same question. How do we stay together when not everyone practices Judaism the same way? And this is an American question. It is not so much a question in Europe and other places. I know congregations in Australia who would find this question frankly ridiculous. So just because in America we have a different way of doing things and we are more denominational or post-denominational or more pluralistic. So I don't think there is one perfect answer. But I also do not think, and I also know that we are not the only congregation trying to figure this out. So this is Edith. I'm from Small Bema Big Torah, and we're over the next few weeks going to talk about some of these issues. And I thank you for joining us. And I also ask you to put your situation or your questions or your feedback that could help someone else into the comments so we can actually start these conversations. It doesn't matter what flavor of Judaism you participate in. When you are a small congregation, there's a certain set of things that we have in common. And I would like to get us going in a great conversation to figure out how we can best support groups of our size. So thank you very much. And remember, just because you have a small bema does not mean you do not do big Torah. Thank you.